Sailors crossed the same waters for thousands of years before any two of them agreed on what was actually down there. A song that killed every man who heard it except one. A serpent large enough to hold the entire world together. A kingdom that fed a coastline to something with no name anyone could agree on. None of them had satellite imaging. None of them had sonar. All they had was what came back to port, and what didn't. 10 sea monsters that shaped how an entire species learned to fear open water. A few of them got explained eventually. A few never did. Number 10. The Sirens. You hear them before you see the island. A voice, then more than one, carrying across open water, and somehow speaking directly to you, not to the ship, to you specifically, promising the one thing you've wanted most and never said out loud, in a voice that somehow knows exactly how to say it. The oldest versions of this story don't describe beautiful women. They describe creatures with the bodies of birds and the faces of women, perched on rocks above a shoreline that was white with bone. Every sailor who heard that song steered toward it. Every one of them died smiling. Odysseus wanted to hear the song and survive it, so he had his crew bind him to the mast and plug their own ears with wax, with orders to ignore anything he said once the singing started. He heard it. He begged to be released. The ropes held. He became the only man in the tradition who lived to describe what it felt like, and then refused to repeat a single word of it. We tell this story now as a metaphor for temptation. To the sailors who first told it, the metaphor came later. What they were actually doing was marking a stretch of coastline to steer around and warning each other about a very specific kind of death, one that, from a distance, looked like a man swimming happily towards something only he could hear. Number 9. Cetus. In the myth, the kingdom of Cetus wasn't being raided. It was being eaten, one stretch of shoreline at a time. The coastline kept disappearing, and so did the people standing on it. The old accounts describe something that surfaced like a moving reef, a back wide enough to mistake for land, a mouth wider than the kingdom's own harbor. The kingdom's response tells you everything about how outmatched they felt. They didn't send an army. They chained their own princess Andromeda to a cliff and left her there as an offering, hoping it would take her instead of everyone else. What actually stopped the creature wasn't a battle plan. It was a traveler passing overhead by coincidence, carrying the severed head of a gorgon in a sack. One look turned the beast to stone where it floated, and it sank in the exact shape it had been eating a coastline in. The constellation named after it is one of the largest in the night sky. Not a trophy, but a warning, kept where everyone could see it, and the detail that never gets repeated enough. It wasn't hunted down. It was stopped by luck. If that traveler had taken a different road home, the coast would simply have kept disappearing. Number 8. Scylla. There's a strait between Sicily and mainland Italy, where sailors for centuries deliberately hugged one cliff, knowing exactly what lived on it. The cliff belonged to Scylla. 6 necks, each ending in a head with 3 rows of teeth, a belt of snarling dog heads snapping at the waterline. Her cave sat low enough over the channel that as a ship passed beneath her, each head could take 1 man off the deck. 6 heads, 6 men, gone before the rest of the crew turned around. Sailors chose her side anyway, because the other cliff belonged to something that didn't take 6 men. It took the whole ship. Homer has a goddess tell Odysseus to steer towards Scylla on purpose, to accept a smaller, guaranteed loss over the chance of losing everyone. That's not a monster story. That's a math problem dressed as one, and it's the same math problem people have been making in life or death situations since long before anyone wrote it down. And that's the pattern worth sitting with for a second. Nobody on these waters was choosing between danger and safety. They were always choosing between which danger they could survive. Number 7. Aspidochelone. In the year 530, an Irish monk named Brendan and his half-starved crew found an island that wasn't on any chart. Flat, bare, and perfectly still. Grateful, they landed, unloaded supplies, and lit a fire to finally cook a hot meal. The ground held. It didn't move, and then the fire burned down through the soil and the crust of barnacles into skin. Because the island had skin, what they'd anchored to was a creature so massive that dirt had settled on its back, and plants had taken root. Generations of sailors mistaking it for solid land. It felt the fire. It dove. Brendan's crew survived only because they hadn't finished unloading yet. This shows up across medieval bestiaries under different names, consistently with the same behavior. It surfaces, it waits, and the thing that gives it away is the exact moment you decide you're safe enough to build a fire. Different coastline, different century, same lesson dressed up in a new shape. Ground that appears exactly when you're desperate enough to trust it. Number 6. The Kraken. Ships crossing certain North Atlantic waters in the 1700s kept vanishing in the same specific way. First, the sea would go unnaturally calm. Then the water beneath the hull would darken, as if something the size of an island had slid underneath. Then it would surface, arms thick enough to wrap a fully rigged warship, closing around the hull and pulling it under, piece by piece, until nothing was left above the waterline. Some shipping insurance contracts from the period reportedly named it specifically, and captains were said to plot their routes around the area entirely. In 1853, a biologist proposed the Kraken was a misidentified giant squid, and then bodies started washing ashore to support the theory. Real tentacles, real animals, with the largest confirmed specimen measured at just over 13 meters. But that's just the biggest one that happened to die near the surface and drift up. The giant squid lives in water we still can't reach, and it doesn't come up unless something forces it to. The monster that gave the whole category its name turned out to be partly real. What size the living ones actually reach is a question nobody has been able to answer yet. Number 5. Charybdis. On the opposite cliff from Scylla, in the same strait, the water doesn't just move. It opens. 3 times a day it starts to spiral, slowly, then faster, until the surface drops into a funnel deep enough that no one could see the bottom of it. When it inhaled, ships disappeared without leaving a plank behind. When it exhaled, it threw up a column of black water that could capsize vessels that thought they were a safe distance away. Odysseus survived it once by choosing Scylla instead. He met it a second time alone, clinging to wreckage after losing his entire crew, and held onto a fig tree growing above the funnel for hours, waiting for the exhale to spit his mast back up so he could drop onto it and row away. Modern oceanographers have found a real tidal vortex in that same strait, weaker now than the old accounts describe. Either the sailors exaggerated, or they were describing something that's gone quiet since. There's a version of this list where every entry gets explained away by science, and everyone goes home satisfied. This isn't that list, because the next 4 don't get smaller the more you look at them. They get bigger. Number 4. Bakunawa. 7 moons. That's how many the sky was said to hold, according to the oldest Filipino accounts, before a serpent rising out of the deep ocean started eating them one at a time. Long before colonization reached the Philippines, there were nights when entire villages ran outside at once, banging pots and drums, screaming up at the sky to save whatever moon was left. When a lunar eclipse happened, when the moon visibly darkened, people understood exactly what they were watching. The only thing that had ever driven the serpent back into the water was noise, so the whole village would erupt at once until the moon reappeared. It always did. That was proof enough that the method worked. Spanish colonizers documented the ritual in the 16th century, and it survived in rural regions into the 20th, centuries after the serpent had supposedly become nothing more than a story. Number 3. Leviathan. There's a passage in the book of Job where God describes a creature directly, and it's one of the longest descriptions given to any animal anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. Scales locked so tightly no air can pass between them. A wake that boils the water behind it like a pot left on the fire. The text is specific about what doesn't work against it. Spears turn to straw, arrows can't make it flee. And then the book of Isaiah adds something worse. Leviathan isn't killed, it's simply down there, undefeated, for the entire span of human history, waiting for a final confrontation that hasn't happened yet, promised to end only in a battle fought by God's own hand, on the last day the world exists. No size is given anywhere in the text. Size isn't the point. The point is that nothing in the human arsenal can touch it, and it has never needed to hide. Naturalists spent centuries trying to match the description to something real. A crocodile, an early sighting of a whale, and none of it fit. The passage is too specific, and too far beyond anything ever catalogued, to be describing something ordinary. Number 2. Tiamat. Before there was a sky, before there was land, there was the ocean itself, given a will. In one of the oldest creation stories we have preserved on clay, Tiamat gave birth to the first gods. And when her own children grew loud and killed her husband, she went to war against everything she'd made. She didn't fight alone. She bred an army of serpents and scorpion men, and led them herself, mouth open wide enough to swallow God's whole. The storm god Marduk fired a single arrow down her open throat and split her in two. He didn't bury her. He built the sky from one half of her body and the earth from the other. In one of the oldest cosmologies ever put into writing, the ground under your feet is the corpse of a sea monster, rearranged into everything that exists. Number 1. Jörmungandr. There's a serpent in Norse mythology that grew so large, the gods threw it into the sea surrounding the entire human world, and it kept growing until its body wrapped around all of it, until its tail reached its own mouth and it had no choice but to bite down and hold on. From that point forward, its grip is one of the only things keeping the world intact. According to the old prophecies, the day it finally releases its tail is the day the tide rises high enough to drown every coastline, and the day it climbs out of the water to face Thor for the last time. They'd crossed paths twice before, once on a fishing trip where Thor hauled its head briefly above the surface before the line was cut, once disguised as a house cat in a giant's hall, a shape so massive that Thor barely managed to lift one paw off the ground. At the end, at Ragnarok, Thor finally strikes it down with his hammer. Its final breath poisons him anyway. He takes 9 steps back and falls on the 9th. The thing holding the world together and the thing that ends it turn out to be the same creature, and the god who finally beats it doesn't get to walk away either. The water hasn't changed. We've just gotten better instruments and worse memories of why sailors used to steer around certain places on purpose.